Good evening from Boston College. My name is Billy Sue, and I am the Vice Provost for Faculties. Prior to assuming this role in 2016, I was a faculty member and former chair of the accounting department at the Carroll School of Management. I welcome you to the show at 6, BC and the Common Good. The show at 6 features friends and members of the BC community discussing a range of issues affecting our world today, all revolving around the theme of the common good. Topics include how the BC community is responding to the effects of COVID-19, to the enduring challenges of the marginalized, to our own resiliency and solidarity, and to the upbuilding of human dignity throughout the world. The show is based on the central insight of the common good, that is, that the resources that humanity has and needs must be shared equitably. For instance, today each of us is called to promote the common good by social distancing, by wearing masks, by washing our hands. These practices, like other forms of solidarity, are not only for our own good, but for the common good. At 6:40 p.m. our time, my co-host and I will ask our guests questions from the audience. Members of the audience can pose a question before 6:40 p.m. via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Let me repeat that. Members of the audience can pose a question before 6:40 p.m. via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. They should identify themselves by their name and relationship to BC. My co-host tonight, Mary Crane, is the Thomas F. Radigan Professor in the English Department and Director of the Institute for Liberal Arts. Mary received her Bachelor of Arts and PhD in English from Harvard University and joined Boston College in 1986. Among her many accomplishments, Mary has served as chair of the English and Classics departments and was co-chair of the University Core Project, and since 2015 has been a member of the University Core Renewal Committee. These committees have been instrumental to the development of BC's distinctive Renewed Core program. In 2018, Mary was named the inaugural recipient of the Bellarmine Award, named after Saint Robert Bellarmine of the Society of Jesus, who was a cardinal and influential Jesuit professor. The Bellarmine Award is given each year at commencement to honor a distinguished faculty member whose significant contributions have consistently and purposefully advanced the mission of Boston College. It is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague and my co-host tonight, Mary Crane.
Thank you, Billy. I'm going to introduce our two guests. We're joined tonight by Barakatullo Ashurov, who is the Institute of International Education Scholar Rescue Fund 2019 Bo Biden Scholar. And he's also a visiting scholar in the program in Islamic Civilization and Societies at Boston College. We're also joined by Kathleen Bailey, Boston College class of 1976, PhD of 01. She's a professor of the practice in the political science department, and she's director of the Gabelli Presidential Scholars Program. So thanks both of you for joining us to talk about the Scholars at Risk program. I want to actually ask Kathy to just start us off and talk a little bit about what is Scholars at Risk and how Boston College got involved with the organization.
Right. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Billy, for having us. This is, a great organization that probably doesn't receive as much publicity as it deserves. But Scholars at Risk is a human rights organization whose mission is to promote academic and protect academic freedom, and scholars who are suffering grave threats to their maybe their life and their well-being, and who might be harassed or expelled or from their jobs at the university, or censored, or imprisoned, or even executed because of something they've written about or a course that they've taught. It also protects students, which is something that I didn't know about the organization. So I've been the BC representative for Scholars at Risk for about a few weeks. So I'm learning all the time more and more about it. But it includes students as well. And this is particularly relevant these days because students generally get censored or even arrested for peacefully protesting. So Scholars at Risk is interested in advocating for them as well. So it was founded in 1999 by the Center for Human Rights at the University of Chicago. And it was modeled after the European response to Jewish intellectuals and scholars who were threatened in the 1930s in Nazi Germany. And the idea was that, those who could get out contributed greatly to European and then American intellectual and scientific life. And these scholars should be protected in any way that the organization and the community can protect them. So there's many different moving parts to it, and we can go through some of them later in the later questions, but the one that I was most familiar with is giving sanctuary to scholars who are able to get out of their own country and then being given temporary employment by a university. So Barakatullo, this is what happened with him. And he was brought to our attention by the director of the Harvard Scholar at Risk program, Jane Unrow, who is, pretty much the heroine of the Scholars at Risk program certainly in this area. Harvard has one of the largest of the programs. And so, and the reason that she knew us and we knew her is because of Mary. So Jane taught a course when Mary was chair of the English department. I think it was maybe a writing course. And so they had known one another. So when Jane had a scholar that she wanted to have give a lecture and make a little money to support his family, she reached out to Mary. And because the scholar was Iranian, Mary reached out to me because I'm involved in the Islamic Civilization and Society program. So really, Mary, you're the godmother of the BC Scholar at Risk program, and everybody really thanks you for that.
So Barakat, what about you? How did you get involved in Scholars at Risk?
Hello, and I wanted to say thank you for organizers of this show at 6. This is a really privilege for me to take part in this, and certainly thank you for all your kind introduction, dear colleagues. Before I think to start with my involvement with Scholars at Risk, I wanted to take us a little bit further, because that is important. I finished school right at the time when Soviet Union dissolved. And then I have witnessed the civil war in Tajikistan. And I have witnessed how more than 90% of the infrastructure collapsed. And then I also witnessed at this time when what we call it in political science studies, the Iron Curtain fell off, and all of a sudden the former communist Soviet countries were opened to a bigger world. And when our country became a recipient of many international organizations and agencies. And by seeing what was going on and happening, so I put myself a goal that, I want to, to become instrumental like these people from many other countries that coming to help out my country. And so I want to equip myself to become someone that would help my own country and as well beyond. Now, these dreams back in the 90s then took me to several institutions abroad to study. First, after finishing my undergraduate in Oriental Studies, specialized in Hindi and Urdu philology and literature, Then I was a recipient of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations scholarship and went and received my master's degree in the Central University of English and Foreign Languages in Hyderabad, India. After that, I returned home and immediately I found a nice job and started working. And then I said that, oh, that maybe I should do more because I certainly feel that there could be more done, particularly as I was trying to discern what is missing in intellectual life, in academic fabric in our country. Being exposed in the academic environment outside Tajikistan and outside former USSR made me aware that we can improve our education, and education is certainly key to development. And because of these reasons, then I embarked in a very long journey of studying in Ukraine and then later in Russia, and eventually in 2009, joining the PhD program at School of Oriental and African Studies in UK, where I completed my doctoral degree in 2014. And I always returned home because that was my desire, that irrespective of where I will receive my skills, where I will receive knowledge, and where I will learn new things, I want to come back because my goal was to contribute to the good of my country, and then as well to be available for contributing for good and development in a wider, world communities. So I went back again after earning my doctorate, and immediately in next month after I returned, I got the position at the Academy of Sciences at the Institute of History, Archaeology, and Ethnography, and I was assigned one of the big projects to study on the modernity and traditional lifestyle of the Yaghnobi people. This is one of the minority ethnic groups living in very remote areas of Tajikistan in Yaghnob Valley, where it remains, for 6 months in the year, it remains inaccessible because of the elevation and the snow. And I got this project with full excitement because this was something that I wanted to do, but because also my doctoral degree was related with the ancestors of Yaghnobis, the great Sogdians, who were the masters of the Silk Road connecting East and West, and almost for 3-4 centuries, starting from the 5th century down to the advance of the Samanid state or the early Islamic states in Central Asia. Their language served as a lingua franca, connecting the masses in this across the Eurasian continent. And so for me to see the Yaghnobis as a continuation of my research was certainly exciting. But as I got involved in research, so then I expanded my focus in research. I wanted to look into the minority languages that are another part of Tajikistan, like in Badakhshan. Currently, the Tajikistan's eastern province, the Gorno-Badakhshan or the mountainous Badakhshan region, is home of 11 Eastern Iranian minority languages, or these are unwritten languages. And these languages take their root in 2nd and 4th century before Common Era. These are the languages that were in practice when the Achaemenid Empire was there. When Alexander the Great came to Central Asia, he met these people on his mission from Central Asia heartland through Hindu Kush to India. So I started studying then. As I immersed myself in this study, and by combining both ethnography and anthropology, and then I came up with a series of serious questions that these languages needs to be rescued. These languages has to be advocated. We have to protect these languages, and then as I started thinking of these issues, then I came to see what the local legislation says, what international legislation says. And I came to see that, well, if UNESCO, United Nations Cultural Organization, had included these languages into the Red Book, for the languages that should be protected, and if Tajikistan had ratified cultural diversity and linguistic diversity convention, and they have to offer protection, and then they need to support, flourishment or, increase of these languages, then I started posing questions back to the, through my institution to the government. I said that we can't do this. We have to, if we are proud of having very ancient history, then we have to preserve these remnants of that ancient history. These are languages that they make our society far richer than it is now, because the ethnic and linguistic diversity contributes to a greater cultural productivity of society. These languages, they have their own oral tradition, stories, poems. They have their own ethnic musical heritage, the part of the ethnomusicology, how they sing it in the festivals, how they will sing it in the daily life. And as I started digging deeper into this issue and speaking out, then my views were received to be too critical, in a sense that I was given several warnings that, that your opinions are almost anti-constitutional. So between 2014 and 17, in that 3 years that after my PhD, I went back to my home country. As I have started to spread my roots in the academic life and being engaged with the society and with the different aspects of the culture and language and academia. And so my quote unquote bad reputation started growing too, to the extent that I was nominated as the board member for the dissertation board in the Academy of Sciences in Linguistics and Philology, and immediately I was stripped off that, being a member of the board and backbenched. They said that, that your ideas are, dangerous. And so as the situation escalated, I didn't give up. I continued my work and I continued my advocacy, and it was useful to be heard, but also at the same time making yourself exposed. For example, in 2016, I led a project that won over $20,000 grant from UNESCO, and specifically focusing on Yarnobis. And together with a French non-governmental NGO, we have bidded for a cultural heritage grant offered by the US Ambassador Fund in Tajikistan for launching a larger project focusing in Eastern Tajikistan. And so many of these involvements then made my country and some of my senior colleagues in the Academy of Science to question my loyalty. Being educated abroad, being skilled, and having networks and being resourceful played against me. And at the end, it went to the extent that I was threatened to be imprisoned for treason. And they said that I could get as little as 17, as many as 23 years of imprisonment. And so then I had to just all of a sudden, in between 2 weeks, I had to pack our rented flat in Dushanbe. I had to pack all the books that I have collected 5 years in Europe, put everything in the attic, and get the ticket, find a middleman that could help us to get a green corridor to leave the country, and left with my family. And so we came, and then it was rather uncertain period, and I didn't know where to go, what to do, but I was clear that I should go probably to a place where it is visa-free, where I can go easily. And so this way I ended up then I ended up with my family in a Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, the only country in the world recognized as a state by Turkey. The rest of the world doesn't recognize it as an independent country. So this was like a strategy as a middle ground. And once I got there, immediately I sent emails. I changed all my emails. I changed all my connections. And I sent email to my former colleagues and mentors and professors in UK, to my colleagues in France, to my colleagues in Germany, as I have visited many universities and institutions, and asking them that, okay, my current situation is this. What should I do? Where can I go? And eventually then after, some times of wait, and some of my colleagues, particularly my former doctoral mentor, Professor Sims Williams, who is world authority in Sogdian language, that in the world, so that he's number one. So he sent me an email saying, that I am a member of this board of organization called CARA, which is a British organization supporting scholars at risk and at peril. Maybe you should contact them. I contacted CARA, and then they wrote to me saying that, okay, we are also part of this larger network, in Europe and in North America. And through these email communications, then I reached out to Institute for International Education Scholars at Risk Fund. And after submitting all the necessary paperwork, then passing also, the questionnaire and interviewing, then they offered me 1 year fellowship renewable for 2 years. And then after I accepted the offer, then they have nominated me to be a visiting scholar for Harvard's program for scholars at risk. And yes, as already was, was mentioned, Jen Unruh, now dear friend and also colleague, was very instrumental, together with many other Harvard colleagues, particularly in international relation department, who was supporting us throughout, getting the visa, applying for visa, and my children's passport were expiring and I could not, get a visa appointment. There was so many, hurdles. But I'm so thankful that all these colleagues had supported me from the time that I applied and then get through all the visas, and then came and had a very great and very academically productive year. First year at Harvard. I enjoyed it very much, and after being for 1 year misplaced, without access to any academic work, without access to any library. So that moment has really helped me to, to rediscover, academic life again. And for the next leg of my journey, then I was introduced to Boston College, and so last July, so it's like in 1 month's time, so it's going to be completely 1 year. I will have my first anniversary at Boston College. So I joined Boston College, and certainly Professor Bailey and Professor Billy Sue and many other colleagues at Boston College that welcomed me and gave me a very useful, transition, how to come and, because of Boston College became my first home institution in the United States where I began to teach. Certainly before Boston College, a year at Harvard, I participated in multiple conferences, roundtables, and both at Harvard and within US. But the experience in Boston College was that it gave me this grand opportunity to re-practice, my teaching skills and to be back at the classroom after, some time of break. And so
could I ask you what you taught at Boston College?
At Boston College, now we are finishing the year. So at Boston College, I taught 4 courses, one which is being repeated asynchronously now at the moment, is going on, but 3 courses. The first was on Tajikistan, politics, society, and culture. this was a program that this was a syllabus, a program that I developed with, with very useful recommendations and advice by Professor Bailey, focusing on Tajikistan's of 19, 20, and early 21st century, looking in where was Tajikistan during the Russian expansion in the 19th century, and what happened to Tajikistan during the colonial, Russian colonial era, and how the Soviets came and how Tajikistan became independent, and focusing on all specters, both politics, culture, and society as they all come together. And in the spring, then I offered a course in Zoroastrianism introduction, which I appreciated the interest that the Boston College students had shown. And this was remarkable. Obviously, I studied Zoroastrianism and I taught it only once before this. And so this time I found out that there were multiple other newest resources available. And so my course was very successful. And the other course I taught was obviously very much related to my own doctoral training. It was on Sogdians and Silk Road linguistic perspective. I think that I don't want to be very boastful, but this course was a truly historical in Boston College history. Never, ever in Boston College, they taught Sogdian language. So this was a very historical for me, and I think that I truly appreciate the trust of my colleagues from the Slavic and Near Eastern department, Professor Frank Salme and other colleagues who believe that this course is needed. And I had a very good size of students to study. And one of my students, even when she submitted her final paper, she signed her name in Sogdian script. And that is the biggest achievement that I can expect, because there is, there is an alumna in Boston College who can write her name in Sogdian, the language that died in 10th century, but still is being, taught and, people having interest in it. So, yeah, and obviously I enjoy the company my colleagues with other programs and courses, and I was involved with the advanced classical Persian text, and I offered what I call it this exegetical study of classical text, and studying the texts from the historical background and etymological. So that was also very rewarding for me, as I see the interest, so I find that very rewarding.
So Kathy, let me sort of pivot to you now. And, in light of everything we're experiencing with COVID-19, it's clear that Scholars at Risk is an organization that we need to support and, really try to help these scholars who are at risk overseas. What do you think is the impact of the COVID-19 on Scholars at Risk, both short-term and the long-term?
Sure. Okay. And I just wanted to clarify that Barakatullo didn't use Scholars at Risk. It wasn't the organization that got him here, but it was the organization, the Harvard arm of it, that helped him get his appointment to Boston College. So just a quick clarification on that. So yes, COVID is making the number of scholars at risk probably go up. So right now, I recently did a webinar with Scholars at Risk, and already it's pretty high. There's right now 700 scholars who are in the network and are looking for placement, either to do lectures or to be placed in this one-year visiting professor role. And I think this is really important, just to deviate for 1 second, because it also not only preserves them, but it preserves their work, and their work is their legacy. And if they were not able to get out of the country, that's threatening them, and come a place where, like Barakat is, able to teach and and educate new students to what he does, and they'll carry on his work, then his work would be lost forever. So this is such an important role, and all of us know how important it is because we all have our scholarship, and we certainly wouldn't want that to be lost. So right now there's 700 who have applied and are looking for positions, which is probably double than what it normally is. They're from all over the world. Those who are able to get out can be placed, and those who are not able to get out, they are the Scholars at Risk advocates for them. So if they're wrongfully imprisoned or what have you. COVID has had an effect because anyone in the medical field or global health, they've perhaps done research and unearthed some facts that governments may not want to hear, and so they're going to be repressed. The research is not going to see the light of day, or it's going to be countermanded by those in government that are doing things for political purposes rather than purely scientific. So anybody commenting adversely to the government's handling of the virus is probably going to get themselves in trouble, depending on what kind of the degree of democracy, and that's a sliding scale. But secondly, I'd say that threatened scholars are more vulnerable under COVID because borders have been closed and travel restrictions have been put in place, so it's harder for them to get out. It's just, not as easy for people to know who they are, or how to get them out of their country to a more hospitable place, or to give them sanctuary. There's a lot less transparency these days, and more chaos and more uncertainty. And this has led to more isolation for those scholars.
Yeah, I just wanted, just to add that certainly the impact of COVID, as it feels for the scholars at risk, is very huge. Because, that the first and foremost reason that many scholars became at risk and then they become threatened is because of they voice the problems that otherwise certain regimes and certain, political parties don't want to be voiced. And COVID in itself became one of those problems that when it is voiced, when it is, disclosed, then the scholars become under the threat, because of what they're saying and then how the government then reacts. And then particularly because of now restrictions in travel makes them that they are homebound, and then also the communication is also that under threat because of as they are there. So now with more censorship and more control over who do they communicate and how they communicate becomes also problematic. And I think that there are multiple ways that obviously Scholars at Risk program is supporting them, but this would certainly be very different once the COVID is over. But for now, the situation remains very critical.
So given your experience in your home country, I can kind of see some parallels to what's going on in our country, right? So as an independent observer, what do you think of what's going on with the protests against racism and police abuse? Do you have, words of advice for us, or, what's your interpretation of what's going on?
That this is a very great, very actual question, but also for me, I find that this is also a very hard question to respond to. However, I just want to make one comment that certainly by seeing the freedom that people have to come out and speak their mind out and to protest against injustice or certain difficulties, this is remarkable. Because this is something that in my home country, we are stripped of this kind of right. We don't have a right to protest. I can just give you one, just a very vivid example that happened. Recently, there was lots of rain and flooding, and there was one particular district where 90% of the district was washed by landslides, and people were made homeless, everything, they have lost everything. And a group of these people in this district, they protested. And now they have identified 6 people who mobilized people to protest against government, and now they are being held in temporary imprisonment, and they're waiting for the court. And I think that as I can see that, as you mentioned, this brutality of police. So there is obviously police that the police that provides, or kind of causes problem with society. But then in some other countries, there are independent bodies. The old Soviet, probably, I think Professor Bailey knows very well, the KGB, the Central Committee in Security or Homeland Security that inherited from the Stalin's period. It is still active. It has a different name, but the mechanism of control and mechanism of the treating the civilians remains the same. Very ruthless and very unjust. But obviously, in my country, I have experienced different forms of social injustice, different forms of, say, harassment than people face in United States. I want to say that in lots of our scandals in my region, in my country, is ethnic-based. When the Uzbek ethnicity, they clashes with Tajik, or when the Kyrgyz clashes with Uzbeks. And so when our conflicts are based on nationality and ethnicity, it has different, let us say, impact in how it is resolved and how people discuss it. Whereas in the United States, some of the major problems that has been highlighted in this last few weeks, that it is a racial injustice. Now the question of race and nationality, this I think are two different. And so therefore, not having enough experience doesn't allow me to speak to it. But I still do hope that justice would be restored. United States is home of some great political intellectuals, and they have offered advice and recommendation for sustaining and development of democracy worldwide. And I'm sure that those principles that they have employed helping the countries outside the region can be also applied in home to solve these issues.
Great, thanks. So we actually have a few questions from the audience, and one of those, so there's a question from Hussein Kuyuk, who's a data scientist at Harvard University from Serdar, Turkmenistan. And he wants to know whether you, Barakatullo, do you have any connection now with your previous colleagues in Tajikistan? And how did they receive your current presence in the US? Are you in touch with them?
This is a very, very sensitive question, but after I left Tajikistan for close to a year, like almost like 6 to 7 months, I was absolutely cut off. I didn't, that the first months I tried to communicate, but then later, as I heard that, security agents visited my family, they called my brother, so I was kind of absolutely keeping myself distant. And certainly after when I came to US, I felt a little relaxed, and I tried to reach out, but the incoming communications are also filtered, and they are being under, say, the scrutiny. So many of my colleagues simply would not reply or respond. And I understand that, because being associated with someone that was, let us say, troublemaker, makes the other person else a troublemaker. And so therefore, I am in a closer connection with my former colleagues in Tajikistan, who became exiled scholars in Europe and in Canada. So I communicate with these colleagues freely, but with my colleagues who are at home, unfortunately, we can't communicate because of all the incoming communications. Everything is screened, and so they don't want to get into a problem.
So we have a question here from Jane Unruh, who's the director of the Harvard Scholars at Risk program. And she's asking Barakatullo, you describe support from many different organizations. It sounds like when organizations work together, scholars like you benefit, as do host institutions and students. What advice would you give to scholars just beginning the process that you began several years ago? You know, what advice would you give on how to best navigate through the process?
I think that giving this very wide network of organization and institutions that are part of the scholars at this network, I think that my advice is that they have to start with one of organization. And then once you are part of that organization, you will become all of a sudden part of this very wide or very big family. I have never knew about the number of universities they partner with Scholars at Risk before coming here. I knew only about just the two organizations, you know, like say that the CARA, which is UK based, and I knew IAE, but now I know that it's very big. So my advice is that they have to connect with one organization, and from there they would find the next steps. And so certainly then after they would know, and then most of these organizations, they list other organizations that are connected with them. And sometimes, you know, they can be also referred to. You know, for example, as they, you know, that one of that was already mentioned that the Scholars at Risk at Harvard has referred me to BC. And so similarly, I think that they should start with one organization.
And also Scholars at Risk is the member organizations are 500 in 40 different countries. So it's really a global network that cooperates with one another and with other organizations, like Jane said.
Great. We actually have a question from Jim Keenan, who's the Vice Provost for Global Engagement. And he wants to know, Barakatullo, do you meet with scholars who are in a situation similar to yours? And if so, how and where do you meet?
Very good question. Certainly, at Harvard, we have now a group of alumni. And when before the pandemic, so there was occasions that we would make an email and meet in Boston, the scholars that are around, you know, Boston area. But also now post-pandemic, so we also, you know, during the pandemic, so also there is this Zoom meetings that we have been having, and meeting with Scholars at Risk across US, and also some from outside in you know, in another European countries. And I think that each of us, we have different experiences, but we also have many common experiences that makes us to, you know, to support each other, to understand each other, where we come from and what we should do and how we should, you know, what we should do for the future. Because certainly we are here and we are very fortunate to have the sanctuary to, as you know, Professor Bailey mentioned that, you know, to continue our scholarship, as well as to have an opportunity for the continuation of that chain of academic scholarship to continue. But also we each, like personally myself, I also do have this deep desire that one day the situation will change and I will be again wanted in my home country, wanted in a positive sense, that I can go back, you know, I can go back and fulfill that dream that I have had, you know, in early 90s.
So Kathy, I've gotten a similar question from the chat, but uh, much more broadly, if an institution, and maybe there are representatives from other institutions listening in on this chat, if they wanted to be involved with Scholars at Risk, what can they do, right? I mean, what are the steps?
So it's very easy. They have a wonderful website. You just go on the website and you let them know. There's a button that you click and you let them know that you're interested in being a member. And that means that you'll, you might be contacted to host a scholar, or you can certainly go on their webpage and you can see a whole list of scholars who are looking for placements. And it will give their degree and their specialization. So for example, on there right now is an orthopedic surgeon from Syria, and a chemical engineer from Iraq, and a political scientist from Turkey. So you can go down this list and you can see these amazing resources that if there were a spot that you were looking for on your faculty and you wanted to give a 10-month visiting professorship, they're there and easy to find. And it's cost sharing. So Scholars at Risk usually pays 50% and the university pays 50%, but there's many other opportunities. So you could host a lecture, and that helps too, because while the fee may not be, the honorarium may not be very much, at the same time, they can network and be introduced to a university and other colleagues in the area. So these are all really important ways to help scholars that need our help so desperately. And it's very easy to join. And it's work that's rewarded many, many times in the satisfaction you get of knowing that you've really helped somebody. And not just in terms of restarting their career, but the community that they enter, as Barakatullo was just saying, is invaluable. Just think of the trauma that they've gone through, and the immigration process, and where am I going to end up, and what is it going to be like, and where do I find an apartment, and where are my kids going to go to school? I'd say a lot of, there's mental health issues that need to be addressed, and Scholars at Risk provides all of these things.
Yeah, so that's really great. And we just been asked to clarify that the Institute of International Education's Scholar Rescue Fund is providing the 50% of Barakatullo's funding at Boston College. They work together with Scholars at Risk. But that's great. We actually have a question from Michael Weston Murphy, Boston College class of 2010. And he wants to ask Barakatullo that he says BC is a special place, and I wanted to see if you had any interesting stories of what you learned from your current BC students since you've been back in the classroom in the US. So is there something?
Thank you. This is a great question. I certainly learned a lot, with my class. And first thing is that I think that the most interesting story would be the fact that they have given me a new insight. They often put me the question, can we compare what you are saying with this is what is happening in US? Let us say comparing. One of my students wrote a very beautiful discussion comparing certain political projects that the Massachusetts governor has chosen, and then how that in some way can be compared. But then also I learned a lot from my students about the students' life in US, because I didn't study in US, so I don't know. And then as also one of the questions was that I discussed is about how the question of the ethnic origins is important for modern Tajik society. Ever since the independence, Tajikistan has been obsessed with finding this remote ancestors and connecting the genealogy. And I asked this to my students, and I heard great stories about how you can be proud Italian or Irish, and they're also American. And I think that this is, unique for me to learn that, that you can be proud in both sense, and then you can be also loyal to both. And you would not be prejudiced or discriminated, where I come from, obviously, you can choose only one loyalty. You cannot, have two.
So do we have other questions here?
So there's a question from Tom Childs, who's the Vice Provost for Research and Academic Planning. And he wants to know what advice you would give others in the world who might find themselves in a situation similar to yours. So do you quickly have any advice?
I think that, that when the question said that advice, I all of a sudden feel so wise. Thank you. But, I don't think, everyone has individual situation, but my first advice is to anyone who finds themselves in a difficult situation because of what they believe is right, because of what they want to do is for the good of majority. If you find yourself in difficulty because of this reason, know that you're not alone. Certainly, I was absolutely in shock in 2017 until by February, I think February 2018, when I received all of a sudden so many emails and encouragements, and I then find myself connected with this big network of people who believed in me and believed in my in credibility of my academic work. And so I think that my advice is that these people are not alone. And one thing that we can do also is that as a current fellow and then soon an alumni fellow, I think that our role or my role is that to advocate for those people, to speak about them, to raise this question and awareness. And certainly, as some of my BC students asked that they have never met anyone from Tajikistan, and I told them that by joking that, okay, you need to mark your diary for this day, that this is a day when you met someone from Tajikistan. And I think that I can advocate to bring, these scholars from other worlds, from other countries, and speak that, yes, certainly there is possibility that we can support them and meet them in our, home universities and benefit from their scholarship and support them also with our insight, how they can further develop their research and teachings.
Thank you.
So can I just add that for any students who are listening, there's lots of opportunities for students to get involved in some of the things that Barakatullo has mentioned. And specifically, Scholars at Risk have several advocacy programs. So there's one on scholars in prison, and another research monitoring project, and one for law students that's called Academic Freedom Legal Clinic. And there's all of these opportunities to learn about specific scholars, to do research and to help write their academic freedom index or their freedom report that they put out annually, or to attend conferences or workshops or working groups. So I would, if anybody's interested, if you could email me. You could also go on their website, but I'm happy to field any questions that anybody has if they want to get further involved.
Great. So I think we're at the point where we need to wrap up, and I want to thank Billy for co-hosting, and I want to thank Kathleen both for being on the show and for all the wonderful things she's doing at Boston College, and finally Barakatullo for joining us and telling us about his journey and about the program. So thanks to everybody. I want to remind people that there's another episode of the show at 6, and it will be focused on food insecurity. And it will feature Navin Salem, class of 94, who's a Boston College trustee and the founder and CEO of Edizia. And also Mary Lou Batza, class of 03, who's the director of development at Haley House. And Lori Niehaus, class of 18, from Feed the Frontline Chicago. And this will be hosted by Tara Pisani-Garreau, who's Associate Professor of the Practice and Director of the Environmental Studies Program at Boston College, and then a 2020 Boston College graduate, Evie Satterfield. And this will take place on June 12th from 6 to 7 p.m. And I want to remind you that if you are interested in this program, you need to register for each segment you want to attend. And the registration is very brief, but each segment has a different webinar link. So you need to check out the webpage, bc.edu, show at 6, and look at the next segments. So thanks again to everybody. Be well, stay safe, and good night from Boston College.